welcome to App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Clean My Mac X and Collide. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Doing really well. We are on the eve of WWDC, and so we are doing a very special episode today, live in Discord for Club MacStories Premiere and App Stories Plus listeners. And we will put this out on Sunday and then the regular version on Monday. But we thought we would do some predictions, take some questions as part of the Plus segment, and see how we're feeling, and take a vibe check before WWDC actually starts.
Yeah, and we are going to do a few episodes like this next week for WWDC. We are going to be recording live in Discord, I believe, 4 days in a row or something like that, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, we're going to be, 3, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for sure.
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, okay.
Yes, we'll see if it's more than that. We have to kind of play it by ear because who knows? In the past, we've had some special interviews that we've done. Maybe that'll happen again. Don't know. But
we don't know. We don't know. Maybe, we'll see. And obviously, with WWDC coming up, once again, I just wanted to repeat, I won't be there in person. I'm obviously a bit sad about it, but I just couldn't make it this year. But John will be there in person.
I will
at Apple Park. So make sure to say hi to John if you see John. He's a good guy. He's a great guy, and he loves chatting to developers, and he loves trying new betas on test flight. Make sure to fill up John's test flight if you can, because I hear that he loves loading long lists of betas in the test flight app.
I have a test flight update for you, Federico. It's starting to grind to a halt again for me. It's starting to die again. But this time, instead of waiting for it to die, I am going to try to actively manage it and avoid the problems that I had before. But I've also I really have to track down a test flight engineer or something during WWDC and really bend their ear and try to get this thing fixed, because it is just it's almost unusable at this point for me.
Yeah, that's too bad. I also wanted to say that for this episode, we'll be doing the special App Stories Plus segment at the end.
Correct.
Usually we do the App Stories Plus segment before the regular show. App Stories Plus is a longer version of the show that is ad-free, delivered 1 day earlier and in high bitrate audio. This time around, we're gonna put it at the end, since we're doing this in the Club MacStories Discord server. We're gonna be taking questions from people. And I also have a tiny bit of a surprise that John knows about, but it's a bit of a surprise topic for people. So make sure to stick until the end if you're listening live in Discord, and if you're listening to the regular show, maybe this is a nice opportunity to consider getting App Stories Plus, because there's a tiny bit of a surprise regarding my iPad coverage that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes in the App Stories Plus segment. And again, at the end of the show, not at the beginning.
Very nice, very nice. We should talk a little bit, I guess, about behind the scenes and what we're planning to do for our coverage during the week, don't you think?
Well, yes. So I'll be staying home, and my tentative plan is to follow the keynote, follow the announcements, read the press releases, and then coordinate. Since you'll be on the ground, at Apple Park, and you'll be busy, my tentative plan is to coordinate with Nilayan, with Devon, with Jonathan, whoever's going to be available for the MacStories team, to see how we can prepare our coverage and sort of assign stories to each other. Usually when I'm home, I do the iOS and iPadOS overview. We'll see if there's any iPadOS news to cover in the first place. Well, I assume there's going to be an iPadOS 18, and I assume that in addition to all the AI stuff for iOS, Apple will find some time to sneak in a couple of new iPad features. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So usually that's what I do. I will be taking my notes in Obsidian. I will be writing in Obsidian, and that reminds me, I should spend the weekend preparing my Obsidian Vault for the iOS and iPadOS 18 review, because I'm doing it again, folks. I'm doing the annual review, and I believe, if my math is correct, this is going to be my 10th annual review. I think that's right. I started with iOS 9. So in theory, iOS 18, that should be the 10th one, I think.
I think you're right about that. It'll be a fun week. I guess we had a similar setup in, was it 2021 when you were at home and I was I was out there, or maybe it was 2022.
22,
yeah. In any event, what I do when I go out there, especially when I'm out there by myself, is I'm going to be staying at a hotel, but only for a few nights, really with the in-person thing that Apple's been doing since COVID is it really is kind of ends midday Wednesday. So there's the reason I stay at the hotel is just because I can be close to Apple Park. I rent a car. I can easily drive over, get parking over there, and get back and forth a lot more easily. The rest of the week, I'll probably be staying with my son who lives out there, and spending some time with him, which is why I spend an entire week out there. And I also, that way, as things calm down, the first few days is a lot of running around between the keynote and the briefings and other things that Apple might have planned for us. And it makes it very difficult when you're on the ground to actually do writing, especially since we'll have all this podcasting we're doing and I'll be editing those shows, those episodes of App Stories. So I don't anticipate doing a ton of writing myself until at least Tuesday or Wednesday. And being able to stay out there until Friday midday allows me towards the end of the week to try to catch up and cover some things that maybe others on the team weren't able to get to at the time. So that I think will actually work pretty well. It's great. I'm glad that obviously we have a much larger team this year than we've had in past years, which will make it easier for everybody involved. It was particularly hard that one year when you were in Italy and I was in California, separated by many time zones and mostly just the two of us doing the writing with a little help from Alex. So it should work out fine this year, I think.
Yeah, Nilean, if you're listening, can you please take care of macOS on Monday evening?
Yes, we'll be talking to all of you soon.
Yes. Let me ask you, John. I think you're gonna have a story about your travel gear. I do.
I'm gonna have that. I'm gonna have that tomorrow. I think I have to finish up the screenshots and images and stuff.
But I wanted to ask you: are you gonna edit those podcasts on a Mac or on an iPad Pro?
On a Mac. A Mac. I mean, I feel like when you
need to be as fast as possible. Yeah.
When you're under a time crunch, you have to do what's fast and what's familiar. And for me, the Mac is familiar and logic on this. I've still got this MacBook Pro that Apple lent me as a review unit, and it's it's an M3 Max, and it can handle. I mean, it's far more powerful than necessary for audio editing, but it does a great job with audio. So I'll be using that the whole time I'm there. But I'm also bringing the 11-inch iPad Pro, as you probably can imagine. And in past years, I also brought my 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which with the keyboard plus a MacBook Air was just way too much weight. And I think this year will be a little nicer because the 11-inch will be a nice device to bring actually to the keynote and take notes because, when you're at the keynote, you don't want to be lugging around a lot of equipment. And having the 11-inch iPad Pro, I probably will just bring it and not a backpack or anything like that and just take whatever notes I can because, I don't know, I tend to like to try to absorb the keynote as much as possible and not spend my time looking at a screen typing notes if I can help it.
Mm-hmm.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Clean My Mac X. Clearing space on your devices can make a big difference with performance. I just went through this not that long ago. I had a Mac that had a drive that was filling up, and the first thing I did was I went to Clean My Mac X. I used it to find a bunch of junk files, delete those out. Then I went to the large files analysis section and took a look at that, found some things that I could offload onto external drives, and before you know it, I had freed up the kind of space that I needed for a new project. It was really great. So I use it for that kind of thing all the time. I also run it through a lot of the diagnostics and the malware tests from time to time as well. I've been using it literally since the day that it came out. It's been years and years now. I don't even remember how long ago that was. It's been so long, but it's always been with me with all of my Macs, probably like 5 or 6 different Macs at this point, because it's such a useful utility. It will clean up junk files, hung processes, malicious apps, and everything that can slow down your Mac, even if it is the latest, greatest, and most powerful Mac out there. And, maintaining your Apple machine, whether it's old or new, is really essential for smooth performance. Clean My Mac X is an all-in-one maintenance tool that takes care of all that old junk, faulty apps, malware, and dealing with things like thoroughly uninstalling apps when you no longer need them. It's efficient, aesthetically pleasing, and it's hassle-free. Clean My Mac X is notarized by Apple and available on the App Store, and it aligns with any new changes coming to iOS users. Clean My Mac X has been featured in Forbes, 9to5Mac, TechCrunch, VentureBeat, and other publications. And with nearly 30 million downloads and 15 years of expertise, the app is a must-try for any Mac user. As Apple continues to pack its Macs with innovative features, Clean My Mac X ensures that your hardware remains healthy and running at peak performance so you can enjoy a seamless macOS experience. All App Stories listeners can get 15% off plus a 7-day free trial. Check out the link in the show notes now or go to macpaw.app/appstories. That's macpaw.app/appstories or click the link in the show notes. Our thanks to Clean My Mac X for their support of App Stories.
Okay, so that's a pretty good plan, I think. And in terms of, before we talk about our predictions, and obviously we've done the wish lists on App Stories, but I wanted to quickly go over some other predictions. But before we do that, I wanted to know your plan for note-taking and research. Has it changed from last year? I assume you're still going to be using Obsidian. And follow-up question, is there anything that Apple could do in Apple Notes to make you change your mind?
No. This is the answer to the last one.
Well, there's that. Thank you.
I have gone there. I've looked at what you've done at times in the past with that and toyed with the idea and played around with it myself. And to me, it's just too hard to get the plain text in and out of Notes. I prefer having a plain text editor, which is just as simple as possible. And that's why I'll be using Obsidian. It'll be a very similar setup to what I've done in the past. I have used some of the same tools that you have with some of the plugins that we've created for club members and things like that. But I do tend to just create a folder, start taking notes on various topics within macOS. As I take those notes, I start refining them to become subfolders that are sections that'll ultimately be sections of the review. And so once I have all of that finished, I'll then kind of create a parallel structure inside a note that is the draft itself. And I actually draft my macOS review pretty much just in one document. I know that you do multiple documents and then merge them all at the end. So far, I have not done that. I've mostly just drafted it in one particular document and used folding of headers and levels to kind of keep it from getting to be too much scrolling.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty good plan. I'm obviously going to do the same, everything in Obsidian. I may consider, because you mentioned this recently, I may consider Raindrop for some like web-based archiving of things like press releases, web pages. But I don't know, because there's also like, I may just, my research process mostly consists of like absorbing that information and then manually retyping that information. I know that it's probably inefficient. Like, why don't you just save a PDF or a web archive and then use that as reference? But I think it's always more helpful to rewrite something, because rewriting the information, you're actually taking it in at the same time, like in processing the information from a document, you are absorbing it at the same time.
I do a little of that, but what I tend to do is, as I'm taking notes, I'll drop in my thoughts, and then I will copy some text from whatever article or whatever it is that I'm reading, paste it in as a block quote, along with a URL, just so I can find it again. Because I don't like just doing highlighting and then trying to have to navigate through a bunch of highlights to find the few things that are the most important. I try to put those most important things in my notes themselves, and I will do highlighting, and those things will get saved to Obsidian too as kind of a backup. But for the most part, it's really me creating the notes and dropping in quotes where I think there's information that's unique or something I might want to quote in the review down the road.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk some WWDC predictions. And let's try and do something, and maybe let's try and not talk about AI for too long if we can, because I mean, let's face it, that seems like it's gonna be the thing. Apple doing
Sure.
AI features. I mean, we all know it's happening, but and I guess this is my question. Do we think it's just going to be AI? And I don't think that's the case. I think it's going to be obviously sort of the main character of this event, like Apple doing AI in various shapes and forms, whether they're
Right.
using their own large language model or integrating with some third-party services like Google or ChatGPT. But what about everything else? And I want to start with the iPad, if I may.
Before you get there, Federico, let me just say something about this, because I
Sure.
think I want to do it from like 20,000 feet before we get to the actual predictions, which is, I think they absolutely will have features that don't have anything to do with AI. And I think that my guess is that the approach will be, we'll hear a lot about AI during the keynote. But then when we start digging into things, we'll find that this is I don't know, call it the snow leopard release that everybody wants of every OS. It'll be a lot of little things tucked away in various apps, whether it's system apps or the OS, and that there'll be a lot of quality of life type of improvements to each OS that won't get a lot of time on stage, but will be there for people to enjoy. I don't know. That's at least my hope, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wanted to mention a few things about the iPad. I do think they're gonna do something. I don't think it's just gonna be, the iPad not getting. Maybe the iPad won't get some of the new home screen features. Maybe the iPad won't get all of the new AI integrations. But I do think / hope, maybe more hope than think, that there are going to be some Stage Manager improvements. At the very least, I think we may be seeing a sort of an expansion in terms of how many windows you can use in Stage Manager. And I kind of wonder if maybe, like, it's been 2 years since the debut of Stage Manager. And usually, if history is of any indication, after a couple of years, Apple starts getting tired of their previous multitasking UI and they start doing something else. So it's right about that time when Apple maybe, they want to try something else. I'm not going to suggest that they're going to get rid of Stage Manager, but I will say that maybe we could see Apple building on top of Stage Manager with something like Mission Control or Expose, like those Mac features sort of being integrated with Stage Manager on the iPad. Because obviously on the iPad, they don't exist at the moment. There's no Mission Control. There's no way to view all of your windows, sort of like explode your workspace and see a preview of all of your windows, or maybe even an easier way to see all of the windows for a specific app. Like none of that exists on iPadOS at the moment. And so I wonder if maybe instead of rethinking yet again multitasking on the iPad, maybe there could be a way for Apple to bring in some existing features from the Mac and bring them over to Stage Manager on the iPad and sort of, try and please users like me or Chris Lawley, anybody who's been doing really heavy, intensive work with multitasking on the iPad, give them a little more flexibility and sort of also tie into the narrative of the new iPad Pros with the M4 being more capable than ever and saying, well, now you can do up to 6 windows or up to 8 windows or maybe even unlimited windows in a workspace if that's even possible.
Wow. Dare to dream, I guess, Federico. Let me ask
you. I will be disappointed for sure.
Let me ask you this though. I do think that perhaps there are some technical limitations here that will require something like the M4 in order to do this smoothly. So do you see Apple making features like this available only for the M4 and then having a repeat of the controversy from, what was it, 1 or 2 summers ago when they ended up trickling back some of this
2 summers ago.
2 summers ago. Yeah, trickling some of these things down to some older iPads.
I mean, it's possible, right?
Yeah, they don't want to step in that again, right? I mean, that was a bit of a fiasco.
They usually learn their lesson with these things. And arguably, I mean, even like, I think it'd be difficult for them to justify, you can now do this, this number of windows only on an M4 when you can buy an M2 MacBook Air and it gives you unlimited multitasking and multi-windowing. Like because they stepped in this controversy 2 years ago, so I don't think they'll do that again. But I could see Apple using the M4 to justify more advanced functionalities. Like, for example, maybe the iPad can now drive up to 2 or 3 or like maybe more external displays, for example.
Sure,
like that could be a thing. Like I would expect the more really pro-user oriented workflows to maybe be exclusive to the M4, or maybe, and here's where I'm going to mention AI, maybe there's a way for Apple to do AI-powered multitasking. I don't even know what that means. But since we should expect AI to be sprinkled on top of everything, like an Italian sprinkles basil on top of everything, maybe there's a way for Apple to say, hey, we're doing AI multitasking and we're using our own large language model to suggest and automatically combine windows for you. I don't know. I mean, they could do it, you know?
Yeah, they could. Boy, that sounds like something that'd be hard to do, just because I think people work so much. So everybody has a different workflow for how they like to set up their devices, whether it's an iPad or a Mac or whatever.
Well, but maybe they could do something like you ask Siri or whatever interface we may end up having for AI to say, hey, create 2 workspaces for me, one that has Logic, Safari, and Mail, and another that has all of my the Photos app and Files. And like that's a relatively complex natural language query.
Sure, that's true.
And a model could say, okay, I'm going to take the windows. I'm going to assume that you want to use the most recently accessed windows, and I'm going to combine them in a workspace for you. And I'm going to create 2 separate workspaces with these windows. Like that could be something that I could see Apple doing on device. And honestly, it would be pretty cool.
That would be cool. I thought you were suggesting what is effectively generative workspaces, where the system.
I was also suggesting that. Yeah, they could do that. They could.
Where it would, the system would just anticipate what you want and create your workspaces for you. I think that would be confusing. I don't.
Did we just invent generative multitasking?
I think we did. We're gonna have to trademark that one, Federico. You know how it is with Apple. You got to get your trademarks and make sure they don't stomp all over your rights. All right. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Collide. What do you call an endpoint security product that works perfectly but makes users miserable? It's a failure. The old approach to endpoint security is to lock down employee devices and roll out changes through forced restarts, but it just doesn't work. IT is miserable because they've got a mountain of support tickets, employees start using personal devices just to get their work done, and executives opt out the second that they're late to a meeting. You can't have a successful security implementation unless you work with end users. That's where Collide comes in. Their user-first device trust solution notifies users as soon as it detects an issue with their device and teaches them how to solve it without needing help from IT. That way, untrusted devices are blocked from authenticating, but users don't stay blocked. Collide is designed for companies with Okta, and it works on macOS, Windows, Linux, and mobile devices. So if you have Okta and you're looking for a device trust solution that respects your team, visit collide.MacStories Unwind and watch a demo to see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/MacStories Unwind. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show.
What's your prediction, John? What's your prediction? What you got? What do you have?
All right. I'm not sure whether this is a prediction or a wish, but I think Apple might finally pay some attention to Stage Manager on the Mac. And the reason I think it is because they did give some more attention to it on the iPad last year. And one of the, I think, unfortunate things about the iPad Stage Manager being so bad out of the box was that it left Apple scrambling to fix that situation. And because the Mac was, at least at the outset, relatively good compared to the iPad, they're like, oh yeah, we got that one right. We're just going to leave it alone. And it's not okay. There's fewer ways to set up stages than there are on the iPad now. And I find it really frustrating. I'm at the point now where I really feel like if Apple doesn't change Stage Manager this year on the Mac, I'm probably going to abandon it, I think.
Yeah. By the way, I know how they're going to use AI for Stage Manager. You know what they're going to do?
What?
Okay, get ready. So what they're going to do is, you know how Stage Manager tries to always show you a tiny bit of a window so that it doesn't... They're going to say, and now we're using AI to determine what's on screen so that our windows, they don't cover something that could be potentially useful for you. They're going to use vision recognition inside Windows to determine how Stage Manager should rearrange windows in front of you to make sure that the ones in the background are not totally obscured.
You had me bracing myself there for some sort of crazy galaxy brain idea.
I think it's pretty reasonable. I think it's pretty reasonable.
I thought it was going to be a far-fetched Federico thing. No, that's good. That's good. Not that your ideas are far-fetched, Federico.
Well, no, they usually are. I mean, to be fair.
Hit me with another one.
I was thinking about the idea of reminders integrating with the calendar. This is one of the things that has been rumored lately. By the way, totally like an aside here. It's gonna be interesting for those who've been sort of keeping track of the inside baseball of it all, to see if all these predictions that have been made by Apple Insider will turn out to be correct. Because Apple Insider, they've been doing some really interesting work lately, quote unquote leaking and reporting some of the upcoming iOS 18 features, and specifically the reporter that has been publishing at Apple Insider, Marco, I'm sorry, I don't remember the last name. They've been making some really interesting predictions, and I think it's the first time they're doing this, and I'm interested to see how they will pan out, and because if so, I mean, what a catch, right? To have all of these predictions turn out to be correct. So one of them was the reminders integration with the calendar, and the idea of you're going to be able to see your reminders show up optionally if you want in the calendar, rearrange those reminders from the calendar view, and sort of have a two-way communication between apps, which apparently this two-way communication is also something that's going to happen with voice memos and notes, the calculator and notes. So maybe there's something here that is more about the XPC, like the communication process that Apple uses to let different services communicate with each other securely on iOS. Maybe there's something deeper here that Apple is doing in terms of letting two apps communicate directly, but that's beyond the scope of this topic. I think that's going to be a really interesting feature to have. Like, optionally, you can open the calendar and have a monthly view and see all of your reminders there and reschedule them and manage them from that UI. But I also think that if they do this, it's about time that Apple does a proper API for reminders. Because developers that want to integrate with reminders right now, they're still stuck.
And for contacts, I think. Contacts is another one of those that is very ancient. And I feel like Apple needs to update some of these things to make, expose more of this data that everybody has on their devices already.
Yeah. So I think it's about time for reminders to get a proper API so that third-party developers can integrate with reminders and have access to all of them other reminders features. Like, oh God, there are so many, from subtasks to tags to attachments, rich links. Like, there are so many modern reminders features that have never been carried over to EventKit, which is the really old framework that predates reminders and that was actually originally built for the calendar. So yeah, I will love to see that. And also I'm predicting wishing, I guess, that reminders will get a more serious and fleshed out integration with shortcuts. I tried just for 20 minutes 2 nights ago checking out reminders instead of things, and I was shocked by how many things you are still unable to do when you want to automate reminder creation and reminder management from shortcuts. Right. What was it? The thing that I sent you? That
I think it was the subheaders, maybe.
If you have lists, if you have sections or columns,
right? Section
inside of a list, which is the equivalent of a project in reminders. in Shortcuts, if you want to say add new reminder and you're automating reminder creation, you cannot put a reminder under an existing section of a
Right. It
list.
just gets dumped at the top of the list, I think.
Yeah. So there should be like in this category of like productivity and integration with shortcuts, things by Cultured Code is the app to beat for Apple at the moment. It's hands down the best shortcuts integration for a task manager. No questions asked. Like
Of almost any app. Really.
Any app. There's some that come close, I think, but not to the extent of things.
Right. Because you can do really anything in that app based on its shortcuts integrations. And I think it really has benefited from the fact that it had a very extensive URL scheme for years and years before it really dove into shortcuts. And so I think that they had a pretty good idea of how people want to automate their tasks even before they went down the road of shortcuts. I'm not as excited about the notion of having calendar and reminders combined myself, because I feel like my calendar is a big mess and my reminders are a big mess, and putting them together would make an even bigger mess. I would like to have an easier way to reschedule things in reminders, but I've never been like a person who wants to have my tasks show up in my calendar. I know that a lot of people like that approach. It's not for me personally. So I don't, that's not something I'm particularly hoping for, but I could see it as being a good option, because an awful lot of apps allow that already. I mean, Fantastical lets you do it, for instance, with reminders, which is nice. And I know a lot of people use that. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think that, Federico, you mentioned in particular the reminders shortcuts integration, but I feel like one of my biggest wishes, and is it a prediction? Probably not quite. I guess it's more of a wish than a prediction, is that shortcuts they do anything with shortcuts. I mean, Apple has neglected shortcuts on a lot of platforms. It's not only is it buggy, but it's not used extensively enough by their own system apps. And there are a lot of things that, especially on the Mac, where we haven't really progressed very far from when shortcuts was introduced on it. And that was introduced with a lot of fanfare, and it's been a long time now. And yes, there are a lot of great third-party apps that integrate with shortcuts now that help fill the gaps, but it's just too much of a patchwork quilt. And I think for more people to get into shortcuts, Apple really needs to build some of those fundamental base level things into the app itself and into the OS itself, instead of relying on, whether it's Keyboard Maestro or Hazel or Better Touch Tool or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. All right. Before we wrap up the regular show and we move on to App Stories Plus, I'm going to give you and myself one AI prediction. Okay. Because we got to do it.
All right.
And I'm going to go. So this is not a wish. This is an actual prediction. I think something that Apple could do in terms of generative AI is generative playlist generation in Apple Music.
Yeah, that would be good.
I think because we've seen the third-party tools for services like Spotify, we've seen some similar integrations with Apple Music that usually involve ChatGPT or services like that. Yep. I think Apple has a pretty good shot at enabling natural language, sort of reminiscent. Do you remember the sentence feature from Beats Music from 10 years ago?
I would love them to call it the sentence again. It would be fantastic. Why not?
They should totally reuse that word, like the sentence, like just and like just write a sentence and you make a playlist. I could imagine like the marketing new playlists as easy as a sentence or something like that. But yeah, imagine doing something like doing a road trip with friends and we're in the mood for some mid-90s Britpop.
Right. Oh, I remember all these things. I'm at a barbecue at the beach having a pina colada with my college friends. They were all kind of silly, but they worked pretty well.
Yeah, and I think there's a real opportunity for Apple to make Apple Music a lot of fun for a lot of people. Yep. Hopefully with support for multiple languages, by letting people describe the playlists they want and using an on-device model, or maybe if that's not enough, even just going to the cloud for extra processing to make playlists, or even like not necessarily even playlists that are actually saved in the music app, but imagine just talking to Siri and saying, hey, I want to listen to this and this and this, and create a mix for me on the fly that doesn't get saved anywhere, but that optionally, if you like the results, you can save it, right, as a playlist.
Right.
I could see Apple doing something like that.
Yeah, and it could work like a radio station where it's just kind of an infinite playlist. The pieces are there. Obviously, there's all the historical beat design of things like the sentence, but Apple's already doing its own algorithmic playlists. Why not open up some of that technology to users to allow people to define their own sort of playlists that they want? I think it's a great idea.
All right. What is your AI prediction?
I have one that's kind of goes to the plumbing of iOS and iPadOS. And I've been thinking a lot about the share sheet lately because I feel like the share sheet and share extensions and action extensions have all gotten kind of creaky. It's literally one of the things that I always expect to be broken when I first install a beta over the summer on my iPhone or iPad. It just doesn't work very well. And too much is hanging off of the share sheet now. So what I think I would like to see, and I think Apple might do, bake AI into the share sheet in some way as a way to allow different apps from different developers to trade information and use that data in a unique way in the destination app. So instead of just sending, an image and the image popping open in the other app, the image can be used in some way. It's actually a little bit like what you've described in the past of opening up shortcuts to allow developers to interoperate between their apps without having to go straight between them, peer to peer, as opposed to going through the Shortcuts app first.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. So you will be leaving this weekend. You're going to Cupertino.
Going on Saturday, so I'll be there late in the afternoon. Probably head over to the Apple Store at some point, Saturday or Sunday, if anybody in the audience is around and wants to say hello.
Yeah, you're gonna have a story with your travel gear that people can check out, and I will be staying home with my iPad Pros, plural, and we're gonna talk about this in the Plus segment for App Stories Plus. It's a bit of a story that I need to tell people. John knows. And we're going to talk about my multiple iPad Pros. And so stay tuned for the WWDC 24 coverage on MacStories. There's going to be a lot of it. There's going to be a lot of App Stories episodes next week. Maybe some surprises. We'll see. There's going to be WWDC themed issues of MacStories Weekly and all the other things we do at the club. There's going to be people in the Discord. Like there's a lot. We're doing a lot as always, and it's going to be fun.
Yep. I'm looking forward to it. I got a couple more nights to catch up on my rest, and then I'm heading on out. All right, Federico, that's a great episode. I want to thank our two sponsors for this week, Clean My Mac X and Collide. You can find the two of us over at MacStories.net. We are on Mastodon. Just go to Viticci.MacStories.net and JohnVorhees.MacStories.net. We're also on Threads and Instagram, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.